Good morning. We have a few people in here. I don't know, Eliza, so remember what happened last time. Just want to make sure.
Okay, thanks.
Right.
I know Quincy's name. I've not met Quincy, but hey Quincy. I know we've emailed a little bit.
Yes,
In a very
nice to,
Durham way, of course, our worlds collide this summer.
I know. All paths cross eventually.
Hi, Alshanda. Did I say your name correctly?
Yes, I'm Elshona. I am with Alliance Health. So I
Oh,
am just the community impact specialist for Durham. So I'm just trying to find places and spaces where I can impact the Durham community.
awesome. Glad you're here.
Thank you.
Yeah. Do you also come to the exec large meetings? I mean the HSAC larger meetings?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Very cool. Good. Great to meet you. Um, so we'll give folks a little bit of time to trickle in before we get started.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. Good morning. Are we aware of any absences? No.
Not that I'm aware of.
I'm gonna double check again and make sure didn't miss any.
I'll text Sharita.
Okay, well, I think now we have quorum, right?
I have 4.
It's Russ joins.
Yeah.
Great. I'm way better at counting quorum in these smaller meetings. It's like so hard in the large meetings. Hey, Jonathan.
Hey, Eliza, good morning, everybody, and happy Friday.
Yes, good morning and happy Friday to you as well. All right, so as we're seeing if Sharita's joining this morning, we can go ahead and get started since we have quorum. Welcome. I'm calling our June exec meeting to order at 10:02. I did send the agenda ahead of time and we've got a couple small shifts. We're going to go ahead and approve the minutes, but then we're going to bump up the governance charter changes to the top of the meeting. And Colin can introduce us to Quincy, who's supported with that or supporting us on that. And then I also did not add the calendar approval for the following year. So I want to make sure we cover that as well. So Colin and let me know who should be the lead on that piece, but that wasn't on our agenda. And then I remembered that it should have been. So those are the two things we'll add. So Russ sent the minutes for April and May, and then I resent them alongside the agenda a couple days ago, opening the floor for any edits or changes that need to occur in those minutes. Give folks a minute to review as needed. All right, hearing nothing, I will take a motion to approve the April and May exec minutes.
I make a motion to approve the minutes.
I second that motion.
Great.
You Megan?
Thank you, Ebony and Jonathan. If please vote in the chat, yes, no, or abstain. Great, the minutes have been approved. All right, so we'll move on to our governance charter changes follow-up. So we brought this to the full HSAC, and there were a few questions, and also thoughts around like how do we bring forward the language changes to HSAC. And our next meeting, our June meeting, is a full COC meeting, so it feels appropriate to bring this forward with a more in-depth look at those pieces. So I'll hand it over to you, Colin, and then you and Quincy can run through things for us.
Good morning, everyone. I wanted to introduce Quincy Foster. I don't know that all of you have met her yet. Quincy is a Duke Masters of Public Policy student and finishing her first year, and is an intern in the city manager's office and had an interest in homeless work. So we are one of 4 projects that she is working on. So we decided we would let her take a crack at governance. And so she's going to be working with us until August on sort of governance rewrites and structures. So Quincy and Eliza and Anthony and I have met, and Anthony, Quincy and I met, and Quincy and I have met, and we've got Quincy's put some work into working on our governance document and only looking at the governance of our committees at this point. We have sort of ventured into other areas, but today we are only going to look at the marked up governance pieces of removing things. So with that, I will turn it over to Quincy if you'd like to share your work and
Yes.
kind of what we got.
Does everyone have this document or?
No, we didn't send it out. We're sort of
Okay.
shared here.
I can share my screen, or Colin, I don't know if you want to share your screen.
If you've got it up, go ahead and share.
Okay. Sharing your screen, always easy to say and always difficult to do.
Mhm.
But let's see if I can seamlessly. Okay, does everyone see a document with some red?
Yes.
Okay.
I need to make it bigger.
Yeah.
Oh, that's too much.
Okay.
How's that?
Great.
Okay, so I can just start sort of walking through the changes that I've suggested in here, and then people are welcome to stop me as I'm going. Of course, the caveat to all of the edits is that Colin and I talked about this yesterday. With updates to the interlocal agreement, some of these things may need to change to make sure that the language, matches the interlocal agreement. Of course, reminders. So, these are suggested changes and we'll edit them as necessary. Some of the edits are just to make the language clearer, to make sure that there's consistency in phrasing that's used, definitions that are used, and then some of it changes the content a little bit more. So starting with the governance committee section, this individual COC member's sentence is edited to be a little bit more clear about who can make up the standing committees. Wanted to make sure that there was sort of a distinction between the executive committee and then the other 2 standing committees. So this highlights how liaisons can be added to standing committees. And then we have the language about term limits, and we added in this standing committees will have a minimum of 7 members and shall not exceed 11. I looked at some other governance charters to try to get an idea of how other people did the size of their committees. Couldn't find a lot of information about the upper bound, but other committees had lower bound numbers. And then Colin suggested the 7 and shall not exceed 11, but that's definitely up for discussion if other people have opinions on it. And then added in with at least 1 person being an HSAC member, given that the chairperson of any of these standing committees will need to be an HSAC person. So that's the first paragraph, and I'm happy to answer questions if there are any. I can add in edits live if people see things here that they think should be changed, whatever's most helpful. Or I'll just keep talking.
It
So-
seems like some of this is like pretty broad language and maybe later on it gets more specific. Is that true?
Yeah, so the next paragraph has more specifics about the standing committees. This was all one paragraph originally, and it just was a lot of information in one big block of text, which is why it's broken out into two. And then some things are pulled and put down into the executive committee section. So if it still seems too broad, we can definitely add in more specific language, but let me know what you think once we get into the next paragraph.
I just see that kind of like the intro paragraph. And so
Yeah,
some of this, I feel like maybe we need to walk through all of it and then can go back and we'll have better feedback.
definitely. Okay, so then moving down, this is about elections for the standing committees. There wasn't language previously on this, so added in that committees will elect a chairperson, and that the chair has to be an HSAC member. And that's hence the one person being an HSAC member in the previous paragraph. You know, if there's only, we didn't add this in explicitly, but if there's only one HSAC member on the chair, then obviously, or on the committee, obviously there won't be an election, but that's sort of self-explanatory. So didn't think it needed to be said again, but Colin, you look like you're about to say something.
Yeah, part of the reason we have to have one HSAC member is because the interlocal doesn't allow COC liaisons to be a member of the executive committee. So at some point, when we get to the interlocal, a lot of this may get shifted a little bit in that iteration. So we thought if there was only one HSAC member, obviously they're going to be the chair. But if you had 4 HSAC members who wanted to be a member, you would have an election that committee could elect. And the way the current governance document is, the executive committee would appoint somebody to be that chair. So that's a discussion point, whether or not executive committee wants to continue to do the appointing, or if we let each committee sort of decide if they've got multiple HSAC chairs, who would chair that committee.
I mean, I see benefits to both. You know, I don't know that I have a strong opinion one way or the other. I think the one thing that maybe sways me a little bit more towards an election is that it gives the committee members a chance to, pick their leader. But I think, I think that's a very reasonable change.
I generally agree. I think my only question is there value in having that, like the executive committee or HSAC chair would affirm and finalize in some way? I just think of, there could be circumstances where there's some, I mean, gosh, in very, very extreme circumstances where there may be an awareness it just wouldn't be an appropriate choice, and that having some filter for review. I mean, I don't know if that's more of a government thing to just sort of self-elect. I mean, most nonprofit boards wouldn't have committees electing their own chairs. That would come from a governance and leadership development group or from an executive committee. So I may be coming at it with an NFP approach that's not appropriate because it's a government thing.
That's a good point, Russ. And we were just trying to come up with what are some options and trying to give committees a little bit of say over kind of who's the chair. Yeah, 6 one way, half a dozen another. I don't know that it really matters that much. It could also be that the committee would recommend, we could change it to be the committee would recommend their chair for approval by the executive committee.
I can put a note in.
I mean, that might be like another way of sort of allowing the committee to make a recommendation versus the executive committee making the recommendation and the appointment. Like the executive committee could still make the official appointment, but the committee would make the recommendation as to who their chair would be. And, staff would be in each of the, like CDD staff would be in each of those meetings. And I would suspect we would have conversation. I don't think anybody would run that would be completely off the rails or unqualified to be chair. I hear your point though, Russ, that it could happen.
Yeah, I'm not super concerned with it. I'm just more of a, I mean, the other piece I worry about a little bit is just, I think part of our goal is to get the committees functioning at an even higher level than we're at right now. Right now, it's hard, especially when I'm thinking of Jonathan and Shrita have been chairing for like half a decade now. But like if these groups were going to be able to self-perpetuate new leadership, we'd have seen it at some point. Watching Jonathan's face.
So I have a question because my hand is up. I'm gonna breathe first before I go there. And I'm gonna try to articulate this in the best way that I can. I'm trying to figure out what is the overarching goal of what we are embarking on in terms of this stuff that I'm looking at right now. And I did just come on in the middle of this discussion. So that who's is this something that we're hearing from the community that they feel like they don't have a voice? Like I'm just trying to figure out what the objective is and whose objective and agenda it is, because this right here does not make me feel good. I'm just gonna tell y'all just like that. I don't feel good about any of this. It makes me feel very uneasy. And I don't know where this is coming from. I don't have to chair a thing. I can just sit there and open my mouth when I want to. And but I just, historically, we don't see people jumping up to volunteer to take on the roles of these leadership positions. And so why are we going through changing all of these things when I thought we were just trying to figure out how to get more consumer voice at the table?
Good question, Sharita. So the goal was to get more COC liaisons into the committees. That's where the whole piece started. Then there was discussion and question of, well, could a COC liaison become a chair? But the interlocal would prohibit a COC. Currently, the COC liaison could not be the chair of a standing committee because they're not members of the HSAC. So we would have to rework the interlocal to allow a COC liaison to chair a committee, which is, I think, what would help us. And that's kind of the direction we're trying to go, is how do we allow, Sharita and Jonathan to stop having to be chair like in perpetuity? How do we do this, and how do we set this up so that we can have a bigger pool of people? Because a lot of our HSAC members have been on the committee for a very long time. And eventually you just start recycling the same people over and over again through all the chairs, which is an option. Or how do we get more COC liaisons? How do we get committees that have enough participation to have quorum? We don't have as much of an issue with it on the policy and planning committee. A lot of people want to be on that. The bigger challenge is in performance management. So we're trying to figure out, how do we get enough people to help us make really good policy decisions and to help carry out the work that needs to be done. Does that help? Or did I confuse it more?
It doesn't confuse me. It still just makes me ask a lot more. It just makes me have more questions, because,
Okay.
One of my biggest concerns is that we don't have a lot of lived experience people participating as I hoped. I think that our attempts to have people with lived experience be active and vocal in our groups has been skewed, because the people who we do well with are the people that conform, pretty much. And the people who don't conform, we just kind of like let them go by the wayside. And so here we are sitting in a position where we have very limited consumer voice, and we're trying to figure out how to bring that voice to the table. But we're still putting, even in the lived experience group, you still have people who have been able to like your superstars. And then there's the whole group of people that the system has failed in perpetuity for years and years and years. They don't have a voice. And what I see is that we don't know how to work together across the board. And I think that is one of our biggest challenges, because if we were doing that work right, we wouldn't have a problem with getting people to be active and give their voice and participate and be in leadership and all of those things. That's my personal opinion. We just have not mastered that at all.
So you just raised, that's one of the reasons that making this change will help people with lived experience. Currently, people with lived experience can join the continuum of care. There's just been no avenue for them to be members of committees to share their voice, because the committee structures were written in such a way that you had to, the 2/3 of the HSAC, 2/3 of a standing committee had to be HSAC members. And it was very difficult to find 6 or 9, like 9, if you had 9 HSAC members, you could have 3 or 4 COC liaisons. What the hope of this governance change would be allow more people with lived experience to join the continuum and allow them to represent up to 50%. Or actually they could represent more than 50%. Essentially, it could be 90% of a policy and planning committee if only one HSAC member was on the committee, and we went up to 11. You could have 10 out of 11 could be people with lived experience or from homeless service providers. So it's trying to get a better representation and trying to create a way that people with the day-to-day knowledge would be helping to guide more of the policies, because a lot of the HSAC members that are on committees are not in this day-to-day. So they rely on community development staff who are not doing the work on a day-to-day basis and aren't living homelessness day-to-day. So we're trying to figure out how do we get the right balance of the right people in the committees to get the right information to align at the right policy at the right time.
And I hear you on that, but at the same time, none of our meetings are closed. All our meetings are open.
Mm-hmm.
So people, and at least I believe in policy and planning. Anybody who wants to give insights beyond anything that needs to be voted on, they are welcome to share their concerns and give their opinions and their impressions. But I'm taking it even a step inward, and I'm talking about, that adage that people might not remember what you say or what you do, but they'll remember how you make them feel. This is what I'm talking about. How you make them feel. Do they feel welcome? Do they feel a part? Do they feel like you care what their opinion is? Do they feel like you're welcoming? Like when they come into the space that they're welcome? Do they feel like if it's something higher up that they don't understand, that somebody takes the time to kind of help them understand chronic homelessness and things like that? I'm talking about the way we serve, the way we treat people. Because I feel like if we were doing those things correctly, we would not have such the problem that we have right now. So I hear you saying that we're trying to create the policy in hopes that people will come because it's on paper. But if we are not compassionately working together, it doesn't matter what we change on paper, the people are not going to come. That's all I'm saying.
And you're right. And I think that's the second part of the discussion is if we make these changes and allow people with lived experience, not just to be able to come and share their thoughts, but actually be able to cast a vote, then the next piece goes to what is the organizational culture going to be of the committees? What's the organizational culture of the HSAC going to be? How do we do a more intentional outreach? How do we do a more intentional training and background? And that's the, phase 2 that sort of has to be done at the same time. And, it's kind of not an either or, it's a both and question.
I mean, some of this to me also seems like this is sort of a perennial problem, is that like there's almost in some ways like a political will issue. I mean, that sort of ties into the leadership. There is a core group of us that are committed in doing the work. And we end up continuing to do the work. But we really need more people to step up. From my end of things in performance management, a lot of my members are COC members, projects that are getting funding from the COC process. And it makes sense, right? Like we're making decisions about the scorecard, about how they're going to be evaluated, those kind of things. And we've just got to have, at least with the performance management, we've got to have more flexibility there, because people that are on HSAC are just not, some are just not stepping up, to meet that balance quota. So, I'm in support of anything that gives this structure more flexibility for the people who do agree to step up to be able to serve.
I have a quick follow-up question around the recommended size of the standing committees. I heard that be 7 to 10. Was that what it was?
7 to 11.
Okay. Is the current, I'm thinking policy and planning specifically because I'm understanding that they are larger. Is the current size of that committee larger than 11?
Let me check.
I think that would be
I think we're somewhere around 9 or 10.
okay. Just wanted to make sure.
Can you confirm that, Colin? I think
Yeah,
it's
so
9 or 10.
trying to remember where we have all the lists.
While you're doing that, I mean, I just don't want to set it up where we're having to kick somebody off because it's over. That I think.
No, we can make that adjustment.
I also see Jeffrey. I see your hand.
Good morning, everyone. Kind of to Sharita's point, as you all know, I came from another COC, but I think it's an issue getting people in because a lot of issue comes around awareness of what HSAC is, awareness of what COC is, also some education, and also possibly some rebranding. There's of course a long history with core people, but if we're looking to bring new people in, I think we're going to need to do some advertising of what it is. Again, some rebranding up to and possibly including a name change to be something that's more relevant that people can relate to, because HSAC itself, even when I first came to Durham, I'm like, what is that? Because the Balanced State even calls it the steering committee. I think that we may need to look at how do we make this more attractive to people? How do we bring this so that people can understand what it is that we're doing and what it is that we're talking about, and then kind of educate the public as to what it is so that we can do some outreach. That's my comment.
Thanks, Jeffrey. Melissa, I see your hand.
To answer your question, policy and planning is currently at 11. But I know like one of the discussions that we've been having recently, but we haven't necessarily like come to a decision about it, was what we're going to do about people who haven't been attending regularly. Because policy and planning is one of those subcommittees that has several members that have not attended any meetings all year, and they've been taking up a spot on that subcommittee that could have been allowing for another COC liaison. So that, I think that is another part of this conversation that we want to have, is that if there are people with regular attendance issues, I think it's a lot easier if we have a very clearly defined process for how many absences will equal their removal, so that we can make sure that there are people in those seats who are going to attend meetings, and so that we don't have situations where we can't vote because there's not a quorum. Because policy and planning last year had 3 meetings where they did not meet quorum and could not vote. And so far this year, we've had 3 where they could not meet quorum. So I think that's another part of this discussion.
Yeah, I'm seeing, I think Quincy is highlighting portion, so maybe we should keep going through this text. It sounds like.
Just
Go ahead.
to Melissa's point, this language is actually from the old version about unexcused absences and being asked to step down, but maybe it hasn't been enforced. Or maybe people haven't been meeting 3 and it should be dropped down to fewer than 3 unexcused absences, but I'm
It
not sure what.
definitely has not been, like, we've talked about the people and we had tried having conversations, but I think like we just continue to have those conversations with those individuals rather than actually just going through the removal process. And I think it's more beneficial for the HSAC and the committees if we just go through the removal process, and then when they become more available, they could reapply to rejoin the subcommittee. But I definitely think we have to start like enforcing that policy that if people are not attending, they just need to be removed so that we don't continue to have issues with attendance.
I would support even potentially dropping it to 2 and 6 months, because we're talking about unexcused absence. It's not even like I sent in the paperwork or an email to say I can't be there. I mean, these are like the AWOL basically, right? Like you're not there, you didn't tell us you weren't coming. I mean, that's the situation, Melissa.
Some were excused, like there's one in particular who mentioned that they were having health issues, but I think that there's a conversation that can be had that, especially if you know that you're going to be absent for like a 6-month period, which was the case for one of those individuals, then you should just step down for those 6 months. You can talk about rejoining at a future time. I just think that we've been extremely lenient, which is great that we're having those conversations, but we do have work that needs to be done, and it's important that we have people in those seats who can execute, for the position.
So does it make sense then, like the language around unexcused absences, should it just be absences, whether they're excused or not? Like, like what happens if someone has an excused absence?
I've worked in continuums where it didn't matter, because if you're voting on things, whether you're excused or unexcused, if you're not there, you don't have the historical knowledge to make a reasonable vote and recommendation on something. You're just kind of following whatever the popular group says. So that's something that could be.
But if you have
whether you use excused or unexcused.
If you have an excused absence, you're not voting after the fact though, right? Like, and it still affects quorum or does not affect quorum for that meeting.
An excused absence doesn't affect the quorum. It reduces your quorum number because that person wouldn't be there. So instead of having 10, you'd be at 9. What the logic was in the other continuum where I was not that you would go back and vote, but if you missed 2 meetings and you're there at a 3rd meeting and there's something to be voted on, oftentimes there's stuff that happened in 1 and 2 meetings before that vote happens. So now you're here and you're trying to vote based on whatever you gathered from the minutes, but weren't part of discussions and things like that. So it doesn't matter either way,
So I'm seeing in the chat some questions. I don't want to get lost. Ebony, yes, I know that I've had conversations with Melissa and Colin about contacting folks and having conversations directly about like what's kind of happening and coming to those conversations from a place of care rather than criticism. So I think that's some of what Melissa was alluding to in terms of like someone had a health thing happening. And I believe I don't know if we got a quarterly report on attendance this year, but I think we at least looked at it once.
We used to do it when we were in person more often. There would be like a quarterly report, and then that way if people were getting into the, missing a certain amount a quarter, then the conversation could be had earlier. And then, of course, the pandemic just kind of threw all of that off. Was just wondering if we could go back to something like that. I know we talk about it in the meetings, but I haven't done a good job per se of necessarily like keeping up with it when we bring it up as a topic to discuss. And so I just feel like if I had something that kind of says, hey, this is where we are with this person, then I could follow up. Or whoever's in the chair role could follow up of the subcommittees.
Keisha, I see your hand.
Good morning, everyone. I was just gonna say, if we do find ourselves having to remove someone, what would be our process for actually filling that seat and in a timely manner? Because if we don't fill it timely, we're still in the same position, no quorum, no vote.
So depending on how we may need to go back and see how we have quorum written, because Colin said something earlier that's not how I've typically seen quorum, where quorum's your membership, and then, you know, if you set it at 50% plus one or 30, whatever it is, but an excused absence normally under Robert's rules doesn't reduce your quorum number. It just lets you know where the person is. So it's kind of like the whole rule where if you have quorum at the beginning, you've got quorum for the whole meeting, technically, depending on how you've written your rules. So we may just need to see how they're written, because I don't think it's, I don't, like, if you had a committee that was 15 people and you only had 5 people appointed, I don't think that would mean that you still had to have, say, 8 to reach quorum. I think it would be probably 3 of 5, if that makes sense. So we
I'm looking at the city's rules for committees. And
okay.
so it is true, like once you meet quorum for the meeting, once quorum is established, you do keep quorum for the rest of the meeting. Quorum is only based on active members. So like, let's say we have 11 possible seats for a committee and we only have 9 that are actually filled, then 9 is the total number of our membership. And quorum would be based on that number. And then when it comes to unexcused absences do count towards quorum. So if we're supposed to have a 13 for quorum and we have 2 unexcused absence, we still need 13 to meet quorum for a vote.
And do we know, not to be persnickety, but this is joint city county. Do we know if the city and the county rules are coherent with one another?
They should be on that.
They should, yeah, they are, because at one point the city and the county had clerks that worked together for all of those meetings and establishing quorums.
Okay.
But I will say that in terms of city and county rules, the subcommittees are not like listed under the city as like their own separate committee. So technically, as an exec committee, you could alter what that quorum rule looks like for the subcommittees. But for HSAC, the city and county rules are the ones we would have to follow for established quorum and attendance.
Okay, so that gets us back to this comment around whether it's an excused or unexcused absence, it impacts the quorums on committees the same. And so I think when we're looking at the language, the way we have it written, it seems like we only really care about unexcused absences and when in fact both impact quorum, which is one of the issues we've been having. So I think maybe looking back at that language and potentially putting in both types of absences.
I have a question too on this. And I don't know how much energy is spent on, following up with folks, about, why they aren't attending. And don't get me wrong, that's important, right? The human touch, the reach out is important. But, I also would hate for our staff to spend time trying to track down folks that, maybe that will work, maybe that won't. So I'm wondering, is there something that we can do that is like low time, investment, maybe have a standard letter. Oh, we see you've missed some appointments or, meetings, and, send it out. It's documented. Because, when you get towards like enforcement, I mean, you got to invest time and resources. And I'm not sure the return would be there. It seems to me folks are either committed or they're not. And I don't mean to be black and white with that, but just having been on this committee for 7 years, pretty soon who's gonna participate and who isn't. So, I guess I'm just wondering, are the resources that we would invest into trying to, get more folks to, to step up, is that going to be worth the return?
When you say get more folks to step up, you mean folks that are on committees that have missed meetings?
Exactly.
Is
And
the
maybe that's a question for the staff, because I know the staff is, they're going to carry out all this work mostly. Or maybe it's not. Maybe it's not that much time investment.
I think I'll defer to Keisha because I think she's the one right now who's reaching out to people for absences.
Well, I haven't had to do that, but it's definitely something we need to think around. But I guess I'll probably need some guidance into if they give an excuse for any kind of health issues, how do we take that into consideration? Do we encourage them to just withdraw from their seat? But if they do withdraw from their seat, what is going to be our process for finding someone else to fill it? Or are we just going to leave it empty?
It should be fine to leave a seat empty on a standing committee. The issue is a seat empty on full HSAC, I believe.
Okay.
And I think, I think what I'm curious about and what I'm also seeing via time is that we should move on and figure out how to continue this conversation another time because there's plenty of other things we need to address today. I'm thinking now it's left me. Oh, okay, so there's the having someone withdraw from their seat versus I'm using the language incorrectly, but like a removal. I'm curious, what is the removal process? There seems to be a lot of hesitancy around removal, and I just don't know anything about if it's the process, if it's like we don't want to offend people. So I think, do we know what that process is around removal?
I'm only aware of a process for removal for the full HSAC. I'm not well versed on what they are for subcommittees. But I know for the actual HSAC, it has to be through the clerk's office, the city and the county clerk's office. But as far as a subcommittee, I'm not 100% sure. And I don't know if that's in the governance, there's some language in the governance charter that kind of addresses that or not.
Okay.
I don't know if there's anything off the top of my head. I'm looking through it now to see if there's any directions in the governance on how to remove people from a committee.
I don't believe that.
I don't think there is. I think it's just I think it's just written can be removed or asked to be removed or
Okay.
if I had to hazard a guess, all of the standing committees are appointed by the executive committee, except for HSAC members who volunteer to join those committees. They don't really get approved, but COC liaisons are appointed by the executive committee to that committee. So if a COC liaison was missing meetings, it would be up to the executive committee to reverse the appointment or remove them from that committee. If it was an HSAC member missing the committee, then we're back into muddy waters because they're not missing HSAC meetings, they're missing standing committee meetings. Or are they missing both? And if they're missing both, then there is a process for that in place.
Okay. And I just want to be clear, I'm not pro removal. I think what is the problem though is if we can't reach quorum, particularly in subcommittees, then the work that needs to be done can't get done. And so I think we just need to spend more time, I think, reviewing the changes and kind of sitting with our discussion today. But we are 45 minutes in and we have lots of other things on the agenda. So
is it safe to say we're not going to be ready to take this governance document to COC in June?
I would say so. And so
Okay.
I think the secondary part of that is like, I'm gonna give an update, a very brief update about like governance ad hoc committee. And like, it could be something that continues to be discussed there, if that's helpful. But I'm rolling off as chair come August, so I think, Ebony, that would be in your court to kind of decide around, but that's possible. Or y'all can keep discussing it at this level as well. But it does not seem that we've gotten through enough today to be able to agree and move forward.
So we'll put it on, we'll need to make sure that our next, because the COC and the HSAC will need to approve this, so it'll need to be at our next full COC meeting.
That's right. Yep. And I would also say, there's always an opportunity to not agree and not move it forward. Like, we don't have to find agreement and move forward. So that's also on the table. Yes, Melissa.
I was just gonna remind folks that the next HSAC meeting is our full COC HSAC meeting, so it would be a good opportunity to bring a conversation around formally approving the, the appointment of another smaller committee to work on governance at the next meeting, since it will be COC and full HSAC. That would be a good opportunity to bring that to a vote.
Okay, my understanding was that exec team could create an ad hoc committee, which is not a new standing committee, without sending it to a full HSAC vote.
That's
So
correct. It's just that since it's governance specific, it would be a good idea to make sure that the full COC is aware of governance change. So this would be a really good opportunity to have that conversation and, go ahead and inform the full HSAC that there's a committee that's going to, or not an actual subcommittee, standing committee, but a committee that's going to be working on governance.
got it. So you're saying, I'm sorry, I understood you were saying we have to have a vote. You're saying there should be a topic of discussion. Did I get that right?
Yes.
Got it. Okay. Yes, that was in the plan. Okay. Let's move on. So we need to approve a policy and planning COC liaison application that came forward. So Colin, will you share the details of that with us?
Yes, and I think Keisha can jump in and fill in any gaps. We did have a request from Drew Wotton to join policy, and Drew Wotton to the Policy and Planning Committee. He had submitted a request to join. And we do have a COC liaison spot available because it had been previously held by the previous executive director at Families Moving Forward. So if the committee would like to appoint Drew Wotton to the Policy and Planning Committee, you are welcome to do so. Keisha, is there anything I'm missing on that request?
No, he's actually very interested, and I said we get anybody that's kind of willing to give their input as we're trying to seek people that want to participate. He's made several inquiries into his application, so I'm happy to see that we're kind of moving forward, because he was asking what the process was for approval.
Drew was on as a liaison with performance management for some time, and he was a great member. And he stepped down because I think he took on more responsibility and open table ministry. And I would certainly support his appointment to policy and planning.
He has my vote.
Great. I think he'd be a great addition as well. So anyone else want to say anything before I open the floor for a vote?
I move that we approve Drew Wotton's application to be appointed as a liaison to the Policy and Planning Committee.
And I second it.
Great. Before we vote, this would bring Policy and Planning to 12 members. That is what the current membership includes: one COC liaison who has not attended any meetings and one full HSAC member who has not attended any meetings. So I think that's just context for us there as we continue having the conversation we were having on the previous item. All right, so thank you for the first and second. Let's go ahead and vote in the chat, yes, no, or abstain. All right, it looks like this has passed. Russ, I see your hand.
Just a quick clarifying question. I am not a COC rep. I'm a HSAC member. I will need to go to a committee after I roll off this group. If I go to planning and policy, that doesn't need to be approved by this group based on what somebody said earlier. Then that opens up extra COC seats under the current structure.
That's what I think would be the case. I think you could join, and then that would give us under the current structure maybe an additional COCC. I think it's based, 12.
Current
So
structure.
then it would be 4. Yeah.
But it doesn't have to be approved. Got what I'm hearing?
Correct.
Because I'm wondering how that works relative to the excused absence. I'm not trying to reopen that, but we may have to look back at that. Because it sounds like you can self-appoint yourself to a committee, but then be accountable for coming. So.
I think when we've appointed HSAC reps to committees, it's been sort of asked for who would like to join. And then I think the I'd have to go back, the executive committee, I think sort of approves the people who sort of nominate themselves essentially. Because you needed so many people, it was sort of a call for everybody and sort of it wasn't trying to find 1, 2, or 3 people like we're trying to find for governing the HSAC, where we have to go out and invite people.
While we're on this topic of appointees, we have approved the COC liaison and we're excited to have Drew. I did see at the city council work session that there are HSAC appointees going through as a part of the work session on Thursday. Do y'all have any information? It seemed like a longer list. Does that ever come to us to make a recommendation, or like, what's the process there?
Are you saying you saw it on work session for if they've come through the application process? I mean, the clerk's office, if there's a clerk seat, has I guess approved their appointment to the board, but they have to be sworn in. I'm not sure if that's what you're referring to.
There's a list of potential candidates at the work session from last Thursday. So I didn't know if we as exec get a list of that, and if there's ever an opportunity to offer a recommendation from the exec team to those governing bodies as they can choose off of that list.
I think it was two open seats, each had like 4 names next to it. And my memory is, at least at some point, because I remember Colin bringing at some point, there was like feedback from staff or this group of like, there's 2 options, which way would you think, kind of thing. I remember that happening at least once or twice in the past. Was that just an informal thing when it happened before, or is that a formal part of the process? Or I think that
What's the question exactly, Russ?
I think what he's saying is we have 2 seats, but there are 4 applicants. And so those 4 applicants are on work session for discussion for, I guess, which 2 they're going to choose. And Eliza was asking if the exec committee has any say so in the recommendation of the 2 that's chosen.
I'm pretty sure city just appoints those people, so they make a decision. They give us the formal letter once that decision has been made, and then once those letters come to our COC, HSAC liaison, which would be Keisha will bring those over to our chair so that we can discuss it at HSAC. Like, it'll just be an HSAC item, it'll be an agenda item to let the HSAC know these are the appointed members to these seats. But there's no approval that needs to go through for those.
And based on work session at City Council yesterday, those 2 vacant seats that we're gonna have to go back through a application process for verification. Because I guess the application at the time didn't have a checkbox to say, yes, I have lived experience, no, I don't, or I'm this, or that. And it sounded like those appointments got referred back to staff to go back and have people fill out new applications for council. So there'll be a delay in getting those seats filled.
Okay. Thanks for the update, Jonathan.
So this sort of begs the question, we have 4 applicants for 2 seats. Could we start a waiting list? You know, we obviously have 4
I have
people.
the same idea, Jonathan.
You know, that really want, and that's what we want to do, right? Whatever we do to make these revisions, it's to make it easier for the people who want and are committed to contributing, be able to contribute. So, you know, I don't know if we can, like, whoever doesn't get chosen, you know, maybe we could say, maybe that would be worth a you know, outreach to, saying, hey, we know you didn't get chosen. You know, please reapply, or we'll, you know, something like that.
Or sorry you didn't get chosen. Please join the continuum and please join a committee.
Yes, yes.
Now you get people, you fill out your committee, you get people committed, and you start them in the pipeline.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that they can only join the committees as COC liaisons.
Correct.
Figure out how to redo the ratios. So I think like that's where it's like a chicken and egg situation a little bit, around like how do we set up a structure that's inviting, and also how are we inviting like relationally. So I think that is like yes to what everyone was saying, and here's a great example of how even if we're inviting relationally, our structure sets it up where people can engage, even if they want to, if spots are filled or they don't get chosen. So that's really helpful about the update. Thank you, Colin. I had just been looking through the agenda and was curious kind of about that process. So that's really helpful. Let's move forward. Let's go ahead and look at the calendar for next year. I think that's an important next piece. And then we'll go to setting the agenda for June and then leadership updates.
Second here. Okay. Screen here.
And this is a voting item, is that correct?
Yes. This would be
We want to vote on this. This also needs to be voted on in the June meeting for
approved. Yeah, like officially approved.
Okay, got it.
All right, so there's a few changes that we were going to look at in order to, and it makes some sense. Moving our normal August meeting for full HSAC is the 4th Wednesday. We're looking at moving it to the 2nd Wednesday as schools are getting started and things get really hectic at that year. And this would work with our chair's schedule. And so the recommendation would be to do August 14th, September 18th. Those are meetings that would work well for the incoming chair, and the November 13th, which gets us far enough away from Thanksgiving that doesn't stress folks. Other than that, we have gone through, Keisha, thank you for your work on this. Team, we've gone through and sort of looked to make sure that we've got all of our committee meetings happening prior to HSAC meetings. And we went through and made sure that we cleared out everything for holidays and found alternate dates. I can make this larger if you'd like. So our recommendation would be to go with the August 14th, September 18th, November 13th for HSAC, October 23rd and December 18th, January 22nd, 26th, March 26th, April 23rd, May 28th, and June 25th for HSAC.
And I'm seeing like the asterisk is how we're marking dates that are not falling on the normal times. So for standing committees across the board, there's just one date that's changing. The November date is the only date that will be different than their regular meeting times. Is that correct?
Yes,
Okay, and then for the full HSAC, should there be asterisks around the August 14th, September 18th meetings as well?
Yes, what we would do is we would delete the August 28th and September 25th dates and then star them as
Got it.
not the normal dates.
Right, and then also take off name, correct?
yes, we just had that as a placeholder so we can know what that date actually meant.
Okay,
But it will be, once we vote on the changes today, I'll update this document to reflect what we approve.
okay. Russ, I see your hand, and then Sharita will get to your question in the chat.
Just quickly, if the pit count falls on the normal fourth Wednesday of January, the 22nd is the fourth Wednesday of January. Just because of the way the Wednesdays fall. I don't know if that, generally we don't have HSAC on the day of the pit count. But I don't know if it would be moved to the fifth Wednesday.
Good call. On the January 22nd.
Yeah, that would be pit count. If it stays on the fourth Wednesday.
So he's proposing January 29th, right, Russ?
I'm just highlighting and it can be adjusted however.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point. You're right, we haven't done that then. And usually Pitt is usually done that. So you're suggesting moving to the third or to the third or the fifth week of January, Russ? Instead of the fourth week?
I mean, yeah, I mean that might make some sense.
Maybe I would say it's probably better to move. I would agree with you. It's probably better to move to the third Wednesday. Because typically we schedule the pit count the fourth week and then also use like the following week as a backup.
Right.
Like if there's like a horrible blizzard. At this point, it'll probably be like a horrible, like, typhoon with 300-degree weather.
You have a very optimistic outlook.
I don't think we're going to get any big, huge blizzards anytime soon.
And that date would be January the 15th, which would be 2 days after the policy and planning meeting, if that's okay.
What was that, Keisha?
If we move the HSAC meeting to January 15th, which would be that third Wednesday,
Mhm.
it'd just be 2 days after the policy and planning meeting, but I didn't know if that made a difference or not. The policy and planning meeting is January 13th. So ultimately the HSAC meeting will be January 15th. I was saying I didn't know if that made a difference or not. If we move it to the third Wednesday.
I don't know. I'll look to Jonathan, get your thoughts on it, since I don't think it would be a problem. I mean, it might just be a last minute addition to an agenda if something popped up that needed to be approved in January. But January is a pretty quiet month for performance management with recommendations or needing stuff from HSAC, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I say that now, but I'm gonna, have your outlook here, Colin, as far as disasters. Yeah, usually it's a quiet month, but I guess anything's possible.
Mm-hmm. So we could always do we can always add to the agenda if something popped up, if we needed it. And if we needed it, we would probably know that it was coming before we got to performance management. So executive committee would be able to sort of plan for it. And then performance management would be able to do whatever they needed to do to make a presentation 2 days later.
Yeah, usually about that time of year, what we're looking at is, some sort of reflective work on how the fall COC application process went, and then, getting ready for the spring review, COC review, the one that, that isn't necessarily tied to the funding cycle. So to the best of my recollection, there's not really anything usually pressing come January, because we're getting back after after the holiday season. So I wouldn't be too worried about that.
Okay. So I'm hearing a move it to that January date,
15th.
to the 15th.
And that this conversation dovetails well with Sharita's first question around impact approval of funding cycles. So across any of these dates, or did you already look at kind of what does it mean to be shifting these meetings up and what's happening during that time on our calendar, our yearly things that we know come up?
Well, the funding stuff usually gets started about this time of year. So, in about a month or so, state ESG stuff is going to come online. And then it's the COC collaborative application process. So there's nothing that I can recall that we've ever had to do funding wise in January.
Sure. And then what about the other dates? So, what does that mean? That same conversation around shifting the August meeting, September meeting, is there anything we need to flag there?
Shifting the September meeting may actually help us with the COC application, because we usually have things that have to be approved by HSAC in that first couple weeks of September, because COC applications usually due at the end of September or early October. So I think moving HSAC earlier is actually better in September anyway.
So we have voted in the past by email when we've needed a quick vote on something. Like during COVID, I think there was a NOFA that was in the middle of summer. So, usually that, we can get around that. Or I want to say we've also called a special meeting.
We have called special meetings, which is a nightmare. I really would rather not do that again.
I mean, I will say this, I'm not going to be available for the August performance management committee meeting, but I mean, I'm rolling off anyway, so that's probably not worth moving. But I think whenever we've needed decisions or vote on a pinch, we've ended up doing it by email.
Great. Okay. Here's another question. Are there thoughts around in-person plans for any of these meetings or all of these meetings?
We've had these in the past here in the Health and Human Services building, and I will tell you that the parking situation is not good. And it's probably just going to continue to be that way until the housing and parking garage projects are completed. So that should really be taken into account.
I would agree 100% on that, Jonathan.
I mean, it's hard for our clients to get here. So, imagine a big committee meeting.
Other thoughts about in person? Yeah.
I think and maybe we should consider some special meetings, like maybe our proposed COC meeting dates to possibly be in person. Can we look at some other location potentially for that? And the only reason why I say it is because Zoom is so impersonal. And we've had lots of seat changes and names I see, but faces I have no clue who people are. And it's been a long time. That's all I'm saying. And it helps to inform relationships as well. And if we want to do better with our relational things, I think really considering some in-person time will be key to that.
I would also, just add that, while in-person is great, I mean, there is something very egalitarian about a Zoom meeting. I can remember not too long in the past where there were some very unhealthy power dynamics in the committee, and there's something very egalitarian about everybody. You get one box, one's the same size box on the screen. So I continue to support virtual meetings. And you know what, you're right too, Sharita. That's I agree with that too. That yeah, if you can't afford internet, it is problematic. Internet is a luxury, even though it's a necessity these days.
So maybe something to think about is maybe it's not a retreat, but maybe it's a meeting in person. I heard a lot of positive feedback about not just the content of the retreat, but being able to be with one another. And maybe that's something that we can do in a similar way, but not a retreat. Like maybe it's one in-person meeting in the coming year, or maybe it's something we build upon. So I think that could be a way to also like do some of that, but not do it all out and try to do, even 4 meetings a year. It sounds like maybe there's not appetite for that yet, but how do we continue what we did last year in maybe a different way, or how do we build upon it? So thanks for bringing that up, Sharita. Melissa?
Just a comment about the retreat. I know we never got to do like a formal retreat update with all of the survey feedback. Unfortunately, I would not be here in August to do that for the committee, but I can share that data with you, Eliza, and if you'd like to use it, and Ebony, I'll share it with you as well, because I know we probably won't get to do anything with it in June. But I will share that with the exec committee, and if you guys want to use that to think of something for a future in-person event. Hopefully that.
Yeah, that sounds great. If you could send it to all of exec, I think everyone would appreciate looking at that. And then we could come ready for a conversation together. Thanks. All right. Okay, so we need to vote on those dates that we were just looking at, correct, Colin?
Yes, or vote to recommend it, and I can pull it back up if you want me to.
Okay. So I'm ready to open the floor for a motion to approve the continuum of care 2024-2025 meeting schedule.
I make a motion. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Ebony.
Go ahead, Jonathan.
I move that we approve the presented proposed meeting schedule with the amended changes for the 2024-2025 HSAC year.
Thanks, Jonathan. Do we have a second?
I second.
Thanks, Ebony. All right, please vote in the chat. All right, great. We have passed or approved the meeting schedule. So that is something that will need to be on our June COC, full COC meeting. And let's go ahead and move there next to planning our June agenda.
Second, let me go find that. All right. So we got the June full COC meeting. And it looks like talking about breaking HSAC and COC meetings into 2 different meeting schedules. Collaborative application discussion, HSAC retreat update, housing first report. and the HSAC schedule. In terms of the COC meetings and separating those, I think we talked about it briefly in a meeting. There's certain things that the full continuum, I have to go read the HUD regs because I don't remember them all off the top of my head, but I believe the full COC, not just the governing board, are supposed to annually review governance documents, approve lead agencies for HMIS and collaborative applicant. There's a few other things off the top of my head that I believe the full COC is supposed to be doing. So if we're going to pull out COC, we still need to have we still need the HSAC members to be there, because the HSAC members are technically members of the continuum. Now, if we want to pull out and propose,
I'm not remembering. Can you give me a more context about where this came from? I'm not remembering us having this conversation and like how or why it's coming up.
it was my recollection, it was related to our COC meetings and our HSAC meetings really look and feel the same. And if we're doing a full COC meeting, the full COC meeting should have a different feel because it should be focused on full COC things, not just items for a governing board. So that's where it kind of came from. It was sort of like, if we're going to try and build out a bigger COC, we need to make sure we have meetings that COC members who are not on a governing board would find useful or feel that they've got a voice or learn from, whatever it may be.
Okay, so having just looked at the meeting schedule and approved it, I think I was kind of under the assumption that some of those dates would be like they have been in the past, where they are full COC meetings and also count as our HSAC meeting.
Correct.
This item would actually be proposing separating those two things and having an additional meeting those months that are just focused more around COC interests.
That's my understanding. I'm not sure that that will get us what we need to do to be in compliance with regulations type things. So
Okay.
it may be one of those, things that a full COC meeting may be a longer meeting than a regular HSAC meeting. I don't know. We're trying to figure out, there was a discussion on it.
Okay, so this is driven more by compliance then.
Well, not to pull it out, to keep them together. There's certain things that from a compliance standpoint, we need to get back into alignment with. There are certain things that are supposed to be reviewed annually by the COC. And there's things that we should be doing, like when we report out the pit count, for instance, when we report the pit count out, it should be at a full COC meeting. It shouldn't necessarily be just for the HSAC. And granted, all of our meetings are open and public for everybody. However, if we're going to do something that involves the whole continuum, we want to make sure that we sort of time those meetings correctly so that the full continuum is aware of, oh, it's a full COC meeting. Here's information that is being shared for the first time to everybody and not only to the board.
So if this is an item on our June meeting, is it a discussion item? Is it a voting item? What needs to be accomplished?
For this item, I don't know that we need to take this to the HSAC at this point. I think it would be worth, if we were going to do anything on this topic, it would be worth an educational piece, just sort of a quick overview on what is the COC kind of responsible for. What are things that the COC is, so, hey, we've got everybody here. We've got the HSAC and a continuum. Who's it? What is the HSAC? What is the continuum? And what do all of you as a whole group, as a continuum, have to do annually? So going forward, these joint meetings will be, in these joint meetings, COC members have a vote. These are the only types of meetings where the COC members actually get to vote on items. And it's not just the board.
I see. Russ?
I confess I'm a little confused. I thought you did a presentation sometime in the 6 to 8 months ago range of like, what's the HSAC, what's the COC. So I remember that.
Mhm.
Is the question that you all have discovered that you're out of compliance as our lead agency on pieces related to the ILA or to COC function?
COC, CFR, Code of Federal Regulations. And I'm not 100% sure we're out of compliance. In the back of my head, when I was doing that research and that presentation 6 or 8 months ago, in the back of my head, I kind of feel like there's certain things that the continuum is supposed to authorize and review annually. And I just haven't had the bandwidth in the last few weeks to go review and figure out what those items are. But I do know for a fact the governance is supposed to be reviewed annually. I believe the lead agency for the collaborative application and for the HMIS is supposed to be voted on and approved annually. We've just kind of been running that, the city is the collaborative applicant and NCCH is the HMIS lead. If I remember the code correctly, there's supposed to be sort of a reauthorization, if you will.
So the reauthorization is, I'm having a hard time following. So the reauthorization is the city to be the lead agency or to be the lead writer for the COC app, or both?
To be the collaborative applicant. And I have to go back and read. I'm trying to do this from memory, so please forgive me that I don't remember the statutes off the top of my head.
So it seems like though, we're not ready to have this discussion at an HSAC, and I would say the only thing that's coming up for me around this item is something that we can think about that has come up a little bit toward the end of my time as chair, and I'm not interested in implementing something new, but is something to consider moving forward is how do we make it more clear who's on HSAC in the larger HSAC meetings? And so if there is even a thought around moving into, you can pin people, you can name people in a Zoom room so it's clear who's an HSAC member. You can set it up like a webinar. And so I think if in any way we're moving toward those conversations, I think a presentation and a reminder around our structure would be helpful before we do that. But at this point, this first item to me feels like we could bump it because it still feels like we need to talk about it more at exec. Anthony and Jonathan, I'm seeing Housing First report. What do y'all feel like is time on, how much time will we need on that?
Hi, everyone. I am here. So I would have to ask, this came up while Lloyd was here. I believe it was, and Jonathan helped me out, it was a report that Lloyd started and wasn't able to finish. Is that the report that we're talking about here?
Let's see. He did. I think he did finish it, and let me see if I can find that.
I know I did an update last month on the like a short summary of the Housing First evaluation.
Oh, God.
I don't think the details were ever shared. I think we talked about, we did the Housing First evaluation, but we never reported out on what the results were.
That's correct. But Lloyd did finish a memo, and
right.
Is this the one though that had the data issues based on how it had been pulled? Or am I thinking of the wrong report that Lloyd gave us? Has that been amended?
That was system performance measures that you're thinking of, Russ. Where there were the different numbers. That was system performance measures.
Yeah, we haven't, that's exactly right. We haven't reported on the spring COC evaluation. But there were some data issues there. So that hasn't been reported on either.
Okay.
Anthony, I'm going to send you the memo Lloyd put together so you can have a look at it.
Okay. Because what I tried to do last month was kind of summarize both the COC performance and the housing first evaluation. So unless this is a request to go into more detail, maybe. Because
Yeah,
this was,
so you
go ahead.
presented to performance management a little bit. So those two were combined. This would be, to the full HSAC.
Got it. Perfect. Okay.
Okay, so we're saying the same presentation that went to performance management could be presented to full COC.
That's what I think, but I'll yield to Jonathan and Colin on it. But I think the summary is better because it's easier to understand and navigate, and it's a lot clearer.
Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, that duplication, if you're gonna go into super detail in a committee and then go into super detail with a group, it kind of becomes I have a committee. So I think the summary on the higher level makes more sense if the HSAC is supposed to function at a higher level overall of the committee.
Sure, and then maybe an additional slide of here are the things that were discussed
Yeah.
as highlights as a part of that committee meeting, I think would be helpful.
Agreed.
Okay, how much time do we think we need for that?
I would probably say if I do the same presentation as we did in performance management, no more than 15 minutes, possibly even only 10. But it's about, I don't remember how many slides, 7 or 8 slides. That covered a couple of things. And in this case, we're just talking about the Housing First report. The other presentation covered, 3 or 4 things, including the performance evaluation. It also covered unspent funds. So I'm not sure how much of that we would want to do for the full HSAC, but if it's the whole thing, it might take max 15 minutes. If it's just one area, it will take a lot shorter.
And that 15 minutes includes time for people to ask questions and some conversation, or is that just presentation time?
It probably can include about 5 minutes for people to ask questions. I try to give reports where people don't have a lot of questions, which is awesome, but if they do, there would be time. If we find ourselves running out, we could always, if the agenda is packed, we could always have people ask the questions and I could get back the following day with a question and answer type response. But yeah, I'm happy to if you want to add extra 5 minutes just to make sure we have plenty of time for Q&A, that's fine too.
Okay. And then I also just want to make sure this is a full COC meeting, and we've kind of touched on there are some things we should be talking about in full COC meetings. So is this an opportunity to talk about some of those things? I'm seeing Melissa's comment. I think my thinking around moving that first item was that it didn't seem like we were clear on what we were going to be talking about yet. And I am totally okay if staff have time to get clear about these items and bring them up in the next meeting. I just felt like maybe there wasn't clarity yet. So are there other things that we should be thinking about because this is a full COC meeting, information that we should be presenting that should be a part of our agenda for June?
We, for those who didn't hear, Durham, Wake, Orange, and Chatham were awarded a youth homeless services investment grant of $1.6 million. So we can share and talk about that a little bit if you want to. I mean, the money's kind of already allocated as in the grant, so it's not like here's a new funding thing. There's a whole plan for the money already. And Central Pines Regional Council was the lead on getting that collaboration and grants applied for. I just announced it officially yesterday morning.
It's hard for me to take on the perspective of a COC person, right? So I think for others in this space, if we take on their vantage point or their perspective, is a presentation like that helpful?
I think in short, it is because it's one of the ways we can be more visible and highlight the great things that's happening in our area. But also if we put the context behind it to say why we decided the real story here is how this came about. You know, HUD made the announcement. Colin and Lloyd had a discussion about bringing COCs together that we didn't want to apply just as the Durham COC. And that actually worked. And another Central Pines Regional Council took the lead. And, you know, with everybody's participation and planning and so forth, you know, we are bringing $1.6 million to our area to support youth homelessness system improvement. And a lot of that will have to do with cross COC collaboration, data collection, data sharing, and really trying to improve our awareness and outcomes for youth participating in the community to give us, you know, we can say from our pit count in Durham, we didn't have any youth to show up, but we don't necessarily know why that is. And so this grant will sort of help us understand how youth are moving through the system, even across maybe areas. And also it will allow for youth to be served in numerous areas should they cross over from COC to COC. So I think that's the story. I think the context and the story of bringing the resources to our area to support this is what we want to highlight.
That sounds great, Anthony. I really love how you're talking about the story and the context and not just we got the money and here's what the money does. So that's really helpful. I'd love to see a presentation that like offers that wider scope.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So that could be 20 minutes, 15, 20 minutes easily. Especially if there's going to be questions. And HUD also announced yesterday a youth demonstration project, $72 million is going to be available nationwide. And Mayor Williams kind of hopes that we would apply for it. Of course, it would probably be another regional collaborative application, probably follow the same blueprint that we just did with Wake and Orange and Chatham. But it literally just was released yesterday. I haven't had time to look at it, nor have we had time to really talk about it. But those of us who were with HUD yesterday for the announcement of the youth homeless system investment announcement sort of indicated at least a willingness to come together again and see if we could make a run at going after youth demonstration money, because youth demonstration projects allow creative solutions and waivers to some of HUD's rules to figure out and try things that might end homelessness for that 18 to 24-year-old age group. So it could be a pretty cool thing to try.
Okay, great. I would say like if, but I think in my perspective, because this is new, y'all need to dig into it. So I'm fine with it being on the agenda after y'all dig into it and identify that it makes sense. The only other thing I would add is I think like 5 minutes just to like, for me to talk about this governance ad hoc committee.
Okay.
As an update, and I've got pretty short update today that I would basically repeat in the next large or full COC meeting. All right, I know we don't have times on everything, but we're over time, and I do want to make sure we at least hear updates on leadership. We may not be able to talk about it today, but I at least want to circle around. So, Colin, do you feel like you have enough for this agenda and we can work together on it? Is there anything else from the group we want to make sure?
No, we just have to figure out our leadership stuff. And we've got some time because we don't do elections on leadership until August. So we've got a little bit of time to work it out.
Right. So briefly, I just wanted to ask, I know that in our last exec meeting, we had follow-up tasks around leadership pieces. So my task was to meet with Colleen. And Colleen did share that she's planning to retire. So it does not make sense for her to be a vice chair. Colleen, she's retiring in September of next year. So right when she would come on as chair is when she'd be retiring. But she would entertain the idea. She has not said yes officially. She would entertain the idea of being secretary if someone was able to support with a first pass on the minutes so that she could kind of do looking at a draft and then bringing them forward. And so she'd be willing to be on those. She'd be more likely willing to be if we could figure that out. So it's not a yes, but it's a maybe. And there's an action step there to ask a question around, is that possible? Jonathan, I know you had some asks out as well. Do you have any updates?
I have none. So I am still searching.
Okay.
For a potential successor.
Okay, so when you say you have none, you've heard no's from everybody you asked, or you haven't heard back from some folks?
I have not heard back from some folks. They've just said, I'll think about it.
Better than no's from everybody.
Yeah.
Okay, and then I would just flag for everybody then that we do not have a vice chair that we've specifically asked yet, because our plan for vice chair is now considering secretary.
So I will put in, we also need to add sort of an appeal for HSAC members to join committees in leadership and vice chair at this meeting. We can always ask. We probably won't get anything. We'll have to keep going and doing personal invitations, but it's at least worth putting it back out there.
So when we asked, are we specific about we need a performance management chair and we need a vice chair on the executive committee?
Yeah.
And I think I'm hopeful that we can figure out how to support Colleen before that meeting, but
we can get that figured out.
Cool. Okay. Are there any other names that have come up for folks around leadership between our last meeting and now, or thoughts?
I don't have anything.
I'm not sure about the process, but are we asking specific people, or do we put the ask out through the full HSAC to see if anybody else would?
Yeah.
Both.
So in the last meeting, I said something. I said, we're starting looking at leadership positions. If you're interested, please email us, put my email in the chat. I think we have also identified some folks to go out to. And again, it sounds like this meeting, we will do another appeal, but be more specific about the positions that we have. All right, well, we have some work to do there. Colin, can we work together? And then also, I think we can touch base with Jonathan. I think our priority here is to make sure positions are filled.
Yeah.
And so those two positions are the vice chair and performance management. And then we have some movement to do on the secretary.
If we have time, do you want me to sort of, if there's things that the full COC needs to vote or approve on, do we want to try and roll that in as a voting item?
Yeah, I mean, what are those things?
That's what I need to go look at. It may be just sort of,
Okay.
saying we still would like NCCH to be the HMIS lead agency, COC, the city to be the collaborative applicant, because all these things are getting ready to start. And by the time we meet in August, the collaborative application will probably already be started. We'll probably need to start moving on a few things. I'm just trying to, is there
I mean, to me,
some
that sounds,
administrative house cleaning that we need to do that's not necessarily going to create a whole lot of friction, but it's stuff that we should have a record that the full COC voted and said, the majority said, yes, we want to do that. Yes, we want to do that. Or yes, we agree we should not do that. I'll just go look at that.
yeah, that sounds like compliance, right?
Mhm.
Absolutely, we want to stay in compliance. I think, yes, we can put in the agenda. I would say that if it's compliance, it sounds like a priority. What would be helpful is if we didn't discuss it today because you got to go back and look, if you could just send to all of exec, like what falls into that category so that we're aware before the meeting.
Absolutely. Yep.
Great.
We'll get that done.
And the last thing I just wanted to share is like been thinking more about like, okay, what does this governance ad hoc committee do? How can it support? What are the ways in which I can continue supporting this team even as I roll off as chair? And what are some of the things that we've really discussed during my term? So thinking about kind of some short-term structure governance pieces that really look like ways to improve functionality without any structural changes. So visual materials to help orient HSAC and COC members. How can we think about an onboarding system? I think at some point we had talked about how do we have buddy system for new members that come on with other HSAC members. Clear expectations for information flow from HSAC to COC members. And then like how might folks be more clear about how they can engage in meetings? So all of that is like, doesn't change structure at all. It's just how do we make it more transparent, not just as we talk in meetings, not just in words and emails, but potentially also visuals. And then the other piece of this is kind of more long-term, is what does it look like when we look at the ILA? How are we in compliance? What opportunities do we have to improve our structure and process? And that those would come as recommendations to the exec team. It would just be like a time to do the work outside of exec meetings, but that you all would receive that work and be able to take it and move it forward however y'all see fit, or like say this piece doesn't make sense and kind of throw it out. So that is the update. And I'm hopeful that some of the stuff we've been doing in this meeting is like working meeting around those items. And so I'm hopeful that that will support this team and being able to like move and have conversations about other things alongside those pieces that have been thought about more in depth. So there's nobody that's on this committee yet. We haven't gotten there. It's just me. I need to chat with Colin about that. But I think what I'm thinking is keeping it small. And it also doesn't have to be HSAC members only. So how do we also tap some expertise in the community beyond the group, thinking about folks that really know about structure and process outside of the HSAC world and what can we learn from them?
Eliza, I'm
Yeah.
sorry, can we make sure to have the presence of the lived experience group, either one person or something as a part of that subcommittee? I think it's a perfect opportunity to start introducing that at the highest level.
Yeah, absolutely. That was one of my thoughts around like what might be the categories that exist. So
Yeah.
obviously someone from community development, does it like a COC member, but I think that could also be a lead person from lead group. How do we make sure there's somebody from the nonprofit space? And then I was also thinking about local universities outside of me. But also I think there's opportunities for us to think about who can be an advisor to the group that may not show up at every meeting, may not have time, but can look at the work and offer kind of more of a broad spectrum. So one of the names that's come up there was actually a charge to kind of look at the ILA in 2020, and one of the people that was tapped was Terry Alabaugh. So is Terry willing to maybe look at some of the work and give some feedback, but not expected to show up at the meetings? So how do we use that structure to kind of support us in thinking about where we've been, what are the opportunities, what have we learned, and not lose that historical lens, but also include folks that historically have not been included? That's an absolute interest, yes.
I would love the idea of we've been having some very short conversations about what to do with all of the expertise that sort of is retiring, like Lloyd, like Terry, like Colleen. So I think a small body like that of expertise would be a great idea to support kind of what that looks like. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would just frame again, like all of this is really steeped in compliance and structure.
Yeah.
So it's not going to create any changes, right? It's going to create the framework to allow for changes. And so I think that's kind of how we have to think about this work, is it's like, just like we started this meeting, it's not going to actually change anything. It's going to allow people to move differently to be able to create change. So I think just being really clear with folks that that's the work, and that both that work and the work of creating the change are important, and making sure that folks aren't expecting one thing when they're in the governance ad hoc committee and get frustrated around like, well, I'm not seeing immediate change. Like that's not the purpose of this group. So as long as we're real clear about that, then I think we'll be good. I just don't want people to have expectations that aren't met. And that feels the most important to me to name.
Yeah, we had the same discussion at the lead work group when we started. It was like, this isn't about immediate short-term results. This is about how you improve a system over time. And so I think that group is now starting to get the hang of what it looks like, based on a lot of the stuff that we've been doing. So
Sure. Absolutely.
thank
So
you.
that's the update. I'm happy to like have one-on-one meetings with any of y'all to share more, but I think I would share something very similar, and do plan to Akal and I haven't chatted much other than on the phone for about 30 minutes. So it's very much in its early stages, but it is something that I'm hopeful I can continue supporting the group on, and that I hope will allow people to make changes that really make a difference for the providers and folks that are our lived experience and are currently living that experience. Russ.
I was going to say briefly, I mean, it may be helpful so that people don't think that it's coming aware. I mean, Mayor Schul went to Terry Alabaugh 4 or 5 years ago out of a place of, we need to get this to a different level of functionality. Not his words, I'll say those are mine. So this is nothing new. We are picking this back up basically post-COVID, because a lot of what we're experiencing, while structure doesn't fix everything, structure does get you a lot of the results you get. And so I think if we can affirm that this has been in discussion off and on for almost half a decade at this point. The last governance changes were meant to increase engagement. That wasn't the result in the end. That doesn't mean it wasn't a good thing to try. It just means it wasn't the result in the end. So some of that context may be helpful.
Yes, I think that's a great advice. And I'm thinking back to when Anthony just shared the same thing, that the context really makes a difference. So I agree. I wrote that down. Thank you. All right. Anthony, we had one more thing for you. Can we bump that, or is that real important to chat about today?
No, it's perfectly fine to bump it.
Okay. We'll bump that to our August meeting. So we won't see each other until in exec until August. And during that meeting, Ebony, I'm happy for you to lead more, but I'm also happy to continue. The agenda that we'll be setting for that meeting will be the August meeting that you will lead. So there'll be a little bit of transition time in August, but again, I'm happy to support any way I can. Just wanted to go ahead and say that today. But we'll see each other for our HSAC, our full COC meeting in June, and then we'll be off for July, and then we'll be back again that first week of August on that Friday to meet.
If Eliza and Ebony, if you guys are around in July, the three of us can meet and sort of plan and
Yeah,
work out any transition details.
yeah, that'd be great. I'm around. I have a little bit of trouble, but if we set something on the calendar, sure we can do it.
Just as a side administrator, we may want to let everyone know, even if it has to be approved, that we're shifting that August meeting by 2 weeks. We're moving into post-school summertime. I mean, if there's any chance of having people with us on, it always drops when we move it, the attendance. But if there's anything we can do to get that out, even if we have to technically approve it 3 weeks from now, we probably want to get that out.
Yep.
Yep. And it's just helpful to send reminders for all the meetings that fall on off times. I think that's always helpful. Great. Okay. All right. Thank you all for the extra time today. I will entertain a motion to adjourn. It's 11:50.
I so move.
Second.
Great. Thank you.
Well,
Have a great rest of your June. We'll see you at the end of June, and then we'll see you in August. Right, everybody.
bye all.
Bye.